The ballroom shimmered under a sea of crystal chandeliers, each one reflecting 1,000 fragments of soft golden light. Waiters in white gloves glided between linen-draped tables, adjusting silverware and topping off glasses of still water. The event was an annual gala hosted by the city's most prestigious foundation, a gathering of social elites, donors, and political figures who came dressed to dazzle and be seen. At one of the front tables marked with a gold plaque labeled Honored Guests, a couple was being shown to their seats by a young usher. The woman, dripping in diamonds and dressed in an emerald green gown, frowned the moment she noticed the man already seated at the table. He was elderly, dressed in a crisp navy suit with a deep burgundy tie, his silver hair cropped close, his posture regal, his presence quiet but commanding. He sat alone for the moment, sipping tea, gazing thoughtfully at the stage. "Excuse me," the woman said, clutching her clutch tightly. "There must be some mistake. We were told we'd be seated with the mayor's circle." The usher blinked. "Yes, ma'am, this is the table. The gentleman is also part of the honored group." Her husband leaned in, eyes narrowed. "No offense," he said quietly, "but are you sure he's in the right place?" The usher hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but nodded. "Yes, sir. Absolutely." The woman gave a tight, icy smile. "Then we prefer another table. Surely you have one more appropriate." The usher apologized and rushed off to consult the floor manager. Meanwhile, the black elder at the table said nothing. He had heard every word. He continued sipping his tea, unfazed, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sparkled with something too complex to name, a lifetime of seeing history repeat itself. Around the ballroom, people were arriving in waves. Some nodded politely at the elder as they passed, some smiled with recognition, others glanced and kept walking. The couple, meanwhile, was eventually reseated a few tables farther back, closer to the doors than the stage. They whispered between themselves, still watching the elder with suspicion. Little did they know, the entire evening was about to pivot around the very man they had dismissed. Not for what he wore. Not for how he looked. But for what he carried, decades of brilliance, resilience, and a story too powerful to ignore. And in just over an hour, when the lights dimmed and the host stepped up to the microphone to introduce the keynote speaker, their assumptions would unravel in front of everyone. As the gala eased into its rhythm, the room buzzed with polite laughter and clinking glasses. The couple, now seated 2 tables behind where they were originally assigned, exchanged subtle glances of annoyance, still keeping the black elder in their peripheral vision. He hadn't moved from his seat. He didn't mingle. He simply observed, calmly and with purpose, as if he had long mastered the art of patience in places that tried to exclude him. From the stage, a string quartet played softly, setting an elegant ambience. Then came the welcome speech from the foundation chair, a woman with a booming voice and a smile crafted for magazine covers. She praised the donors, thanked the organizers, made a joke about last year's wine running out too soon. Laughter. Applause. Then she said, "And now, I'd like to tell you a little story." She paused for effect, and the room gradually quieted. Nearly 6 decades ago, a young man was denied entrance to a university in this very state because of the color of his skin. He didn't protest. He didn't shout. He studied. He waited. And then he applied again, this time to a school across the country, where he graduated top of his class. That young man went on to design infrastructure projects in 12 countries, advise 2 U.S. presidents, and write 4 books on leadership and equity that have become core texts in classrooms around the world. The wealthy couple began to shift uncomfortably. And tonight, the speaker continued, her voice rising with pride, "We are not only honoring his work, we are receiving his wisdom. Please rise and welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Harold E. Lyles." The room erupted in applause. Heads turned. Chairs pushed back. But one table remained motionless, the one where the black elder had been sitting all along. He stood slowly, not to rush, not to make a scene, but with the weight of a man who had climbed every mountain they said he couldn't. The spotlight found him just as he stepped away from the table, and when the couple looked up at the stage, they saw what they had refused to see before. It was him. Their mistake. Their misplaced guest. Now standing behind the podium, commanding the attention of hundreds, not just with his title, but with his presence. And neither of them could look away. The applause faded slowly as Dr. Harold E. Lyles stood behind the podium. His hands rested gently on either side of it, not gripping, not fidgeting. He didn't need a script. His eyes swept the room, not in judgment, but with the quiet recognition of someone who had seen many faces like these before, polished, privileged, proud. He wore no bitterness on his face, no smugness either, just a composed kind of grace. And as he began to speak, his voice rang with that same quiet power. "Tonight, I'm not here to talk about myself," he began, his tone soft but commanding, "but about the assumptions we carry. The ones that follow us into rooms like this. The ones that whisper who belongs, and who doesn't. The ones we don't even know we've made, until they're made visible." The room was so silent, it felt like even the chandeliers had paused. "At the age of 14, he continued, I was told by a teacher that I didn't have the discipline to study engineering. I thanked her. Then I went home and dismantled our entire refrigerator just to figure out how it worked. I never did put it back together," he said with a small smile. A polite ripple of laughter moved across the tables. "But the idea that I didn't belong in a space of knowledge? That stayed with me." At their table, the wealthy couple sat stiffly, their posture perfect but their expressions cracked. The woman's lipstick suddenly looked too bold, her jewelry too loud. Her husband's fingers drummed the edge of his wine glass, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. They both felt the sting, not because he was calling them out directly, but because the mirror he held up showed them far more than they were ready to see. "I've spent my life building things," Dr. Lyles said. "Buildings, programs, pathways, for others. Not because I wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because I knew that every time I was doubted, a child watching me might be doubted next. And maybe, just maybe, if I stood my ground long enough, that chain could be broken." He let the silence sit, just long enough for it to settle into the room's heavy corners. "And tonight," he finished, "I stand before you not for applause, but to remind you, dignity is not something you grant. It is something you recognize. And recognizing it late is better than never at all." There was no music cue. No teleprompter. Just truth. And as he stepped back from the podium, the room, this time, rose to its feet not out of obligation, but out of awe. The wealthy couple clapped too. But slowly. Hesitantly. Because their hands, for the first time in a long while, felt heavy with shame. The applause had died down. The dinner courses resumed. Champagne flutes clinked and music swelled again, but something in the atmosphere had changed. Conversations at each table were more hushed, more reflective. It was the kind of collective silence that follows the truth, not the kind shouted from stages, but the kind that settles in the gut and lingers long after the words have faded. Dr. Lyles had returned to his seat, still at the original table, now joined by the mayor and two professors from the local university. They leaned in eagerly to speak with him, smiling, laughing, grateful. He listened more than he talked. He always had. And while the rest of the room carried on, forks scraping plates, waiters clearing salad bowls, there was one table where the air felt unbearably heavy. The wealthy couple, earlier so composed and self-assured, now looked like ghosts in formal wear. The woman kept adjusting her bracelet, as though polishing it might distract her from the truth. Her husband stared blankly at his untouched entree, his appetite hollowed out by the echo of the words they'd heard just moments ago. They were surrounded by people who were now whispering about the keynote speaker, about his legacy, his brilliance. And they had asked to be moved away from him. "I didn't know," the woman finally said, voice thin. "That's the point," her husband replied, not looking at her. "We didn't even ask." They both knew it wasn't about the seating arrangement. It wasn't even about race, not in the small, convenient way people excuse themselves. It was about reflex. About a lifetime of tiny choices, split-second judgments, and the unexamined belief that people must prove their worth to be worthy of basic respect. She looked toward the front of the room again. Dr. Lyles laughed at something the mayor had said. The same man she had dismissed as out of place now looked like the very center of the event, not because he demanded attention, but because he had earned it long before anyone noticed. She stood. Her heels clicked softly against the ballroom floor. Her husband looked up in surprise. "Where are you going?" She didn't answer right away. But the answer was obvious. She was going back to the table they had refused. The walk across the ballroom felt longer than it should have. Each step was heavy, not because of the heels she wore, but because of the weight of what they had represented. She passed guests engrossed in conversation, laughter rising and falling like waves, but she barely heard any of it. Her eyes stayed fixed on the man they had dismissed. Dr. Harold E. Lyles sat with calm dignity, unaware of her approach at first, speaking to a young student who hung on every word he said. When she reached the table, she paused, just long enough for the moment to register. One of the professors looked up first, then the mayor, then finally, Dr. Lyles. He turned slowly, his expression open but unreadable. Not angry. Not warm. Just ready. I just wanted to say, she began, her voice trembling slightly, that I was wrong. Her hands were folded in front of her, fingers tightly woven together like she was trying to hold herself upright through sheer will. About you. About everything. I didn't know who you were, and I judged you. There it was. Hanging in the air. He looked at her for a long moment. Not to punish her with silence, but to let her hear the echo of her own words. Thank you, he finally said, his voice low but kind. She blinked, surprised by the ease of his reply. I don't expect forgiveness, she added, quieter now. But I needed to say it. He nodded. You didn't owe me a name. Just humanity. And with that, he turned gently back to the student beside him, not dismissing her, but making clear that his time, his presence, was not contingent on anyone's approval. It never had been. She stood there for a moment longer, unsure whether to leave or linger. Eventually, she walked away, not to her table, but toward the terrace. She needed the cool air. She needed the quiet. Back at the table, Dr. Lyles smiled slightly to himself. Not because she had apologized, but because, in her own way, she had learned to see. And sometimes, that was a beginning. The ballroom lights shimmered softly overhead, casting a golden hue over polished silverware and half-finished plates. But at the table where Dr. Lyles sat, there was an unmistakable stillness, not of discomfort, but of reverence. The young student next to him, a wide-eyed college freshman named Marcus, leaned closer. Dr. Lyles, how do you stay so calm? He asked, voice hushed as if afraid to break the spell that hung around the man. Dr. Lyles chuckled gently, not mockingly, but as someone who had been asked this many times before. Because I remember what it's like to be invisible, he said. And I know now how powerful it is to be seen. Marcus nodded, slowly, feeling those words settle into his bones. At a nearby table, others who had watched the brief exchange between the woman and Dr. Lyles were still whispering, not about scandal or embarrassment, but about revelation. Words like dignity, grace, and shame passed between guests who, just hours earlier, had barely registered the presence of the quiet black man near the back table. Now, they knew his name. Now, they spoke it with respect. The wealthy couple sat stiffly again, but not in superiority. The husband had placed his napkin gently on his lap, though he hadn't touched his food. He didn't humiliate us, he finally said. He could have. And he didn't. His wife nodded, still staring toward Dr. Lyles. He gave me more grace than I gave him. That's humbling. Across the room, the event organizer, a sharp, charismatic woman in a navy dress, approached the podium once more, tapping the mic with her knuckle. The gentle hum of the room quieted immediately. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, tonight we were honored not only to hear the words of a pioneer but to witness what true leadership looks like. Not just in accolades, but in how we treat those who doubt us. Her gaze flickered briefly toward the couple. We are all learning. May we be better students. A ripple of applause followed. It was quieter this time, not thunderous, but more meaningful. Dr. Lyles offered only a small nod in response, then turned back to Marcus. The goal isn't to shame them, he said. It's to make sure the next time they see someone like me, they remember this moment. Marcus looked at him, eyes shining. And what if they don't? Dr. Lyles smiled. Then we speak again. And again. Until they do. As the evening wound down, guests gathered their coats and murmured polite goodbyes, but the energy in the room hadn't returned to what it had been before. It couldn't. Something had shifted, not just in conversation, but in consciousness. Where there had once been polite indifference, there was now reflection. And at the heart of that shift stood Dr. Harold Lyles, still seated at his table, sipping water as if nothing remarkable had happened. The event organizer approached him quietly. You changed the room tonight, she said. He glanced around, then gave a modest shrug. Rooms change themselves. I just speak. No, she said firmly, you reminded people who they really are. Or who they should be. He smiled, tired but present. That's all any of us can do. Just then, the wealthy couple appeared again, walking slowly, deliberately, not with the bluster they had arrived with, but with the humility of those who had been confronted not by anger, but by truth. The husband held out his hand first. "Dr. Lyles. Thank you for tonight." Dr. Lyles looked at the hand for a moment, then shook it without hesitation. "You're welcome." The wife, eyes glassy but composed, added softly, "You taught me something I didn't even know I needed to learn." Dr. Lyles nodded. "That's the beginning." They left without further ceremony, no grand apologies, no emotional outbursts. Just the quiet weight of reckoning carried in their footsteps. Marcus returned, coat draped over one arm. "Ready to head out, sir?" Dr. Lyles stood slowly. "Ready." As they walked toward the exit, the student and the scholar side by side, voices hushed in respect around them, a young girl who had been working as a server all night stepped forward. She looked nervous but determined. "Dr. Lyles?" she said. He turned, kind as ever. "Yes? I heard your speech. I've never heard someone like me speak like that before. Thank you. You made me feel proud." He placed a hand on her shoulder and smiled. "Then we've both done something right tonight." Outside, the air was cooler, crisp. The city skyline blinked in the distance. Dr. Lyles paused at the curb, watching the lights, the lives moving within them, the small stories unfolding in every window. "Think they'll remember?" Marcus asked beside him. Dr. Lyles considered the question, then replied, "Maybe not all of them. But someone will. And that's enough to start a ripple." They walked away from the gala, quiet steps echoing into the night, two generations bound not by titles or wealth, but by the quiet insistence that dignity is not something to be given. It is something you carry, even when others refuse to see it. And tonight, the world had no choice but to see.